You're trying to win your Survivor pool. I'm here to try to help you do just that. It's week 3 in the NFL, and I am Statsational for the Sharp app. This is Scratching and Surviving, the show that is quickly becoming the most popular show for Survivor on YouTube, and that I owe a great thanks to you guys for tuning in each and every week. We've got a ton of new subscribers. I really want to thank all of you who subscribed last week and in week 1. There's still a ton of you. 70% of the people watching this video have yet to subscribe to the channel. So please do so. It really helps us out. And if you appreciate the content that we're giving you, it is a big benefit to us. I want to thank all the women who are now watching. It's showing that women are getting more involved in sports betting and these pools. This is the largest percentage of women. We got about 10% of those of you watching this show are women. We're getting a lot of comments from women down below. So welcoming you guys in. I come from a family where the women have been playing fantasy sports and betting for a long, long time. My mom, I think I mentioned her in the video last week, did win her Survivor pool last year, a pool that I was in. So she did beat me out of that. So she loves it. And I really welcome all of the women who are now joining us. It's great to see you guys here. All right, week 3 in the NFL. We've gone through the first 2 weeks with not a lot of chaos. You look at the Circa pool, which is really the granddaddy of them all right now, the big pool out there. Circa has not lost all that many participants. We had over 18,000 people in there. Close to 17,000 are still left in that pool. So a long, long way to go. In that pool, of course, and I know I've got several of you in that pool who watch this video. Of course, we're going to have to keep an eye out for the Thanksgiving games and the Christmas Day games because those games are counted as separate weeks. So a lot of people last week in Circa did not take Baltimore because they are potentially a pick for Thanksgiving. That pick, of course, if you did save Baltimore, looks a lot better now because their opponent for that Thanksgiving game is Cincinnati. Of course, Cincinnati losing their quarterback. Now, we lost a few quarterbacks this week. The most notable, of course, Joe Burrow, and he's going to be out for at least 3 months. And that's how things in Survivor can change, where we were looking, if you start looking out to the future and then these things happen like quarterback injuries, primarily going to be a quarterback injury, you can't always necessarily predict the teams that we're going to take in the future. That's why even in very large pools, while future value and future games are obviously a consideration, it's extremely difficult, really impossible to be able to map out your entire year because injuries are going to happen. Teams that we don't expect necessarily to be really good wind up being playoff quality teams. Go back to Cincinnati last season, Monday night game, week 2, I believe it was, against Washington, and nobody really thought Washington was good. You had a rookie quarterback against Cincinnati, who everyone expected to be a playoff quality team, and Cincinnati winds up never really in that game, knocking a ton of people out of a week where on Sunday, a lot of people were knocked out already. I know for one, I had a ton of Cincinnati and thought I was sitting really pretty with all the upsets that happened on the Sunday. And then Monday night, I joined the pack of upsets and was out on that Monday night in a lot of my entries. So let's get into this week's games. We talked about last week. You know, those of you who you did not take the Baltimore route. And I took Baltimore. I'm in that DraftKings pool. I took 10 out of 10 with Baltimore because I looked at it and I liked the Baltimore pick because they were never going to be at least looking out in the future, which I just said is a very difficult thing to do. But when we look in the pretty much near future, the big weeks that they have, the big spreads that we're expecting, there are going to be other options that were close, if not better than Baltimore. Baltimore, the gap between Baltimore and the next best team last week, which was Arizona, was potentially greater than any other week in the future. So I was going to take the so-called free square and move on in my pool. Now, after it's all said and done, yes, did I advance? Of course, but I would have loved to have taken Arizona instead, or even a Dallas, right? Despite both of those teams kind of holding on. Dallas really, I don't want to say should have lost, very close to losing. And if not for just Bryce Young, I know the stats were really good, but Bryce Young not really playing well at all. Carolina might win that game as well. So that's Survivor. I mean, that's the way it goes. the better teams were able to hang on. At least the teams that were better in the betting markets were able to hang on, and you guys advanced if you did pass on Baltimore. So your advantage there is, of course, you still have Baltimore, one of the best teams in the league. So I actually want to talk about that just quickly here. I've gotten some questions. I want to touch on a few of the questions that I get over and over again, and hopefully answer some of those in the video for you guys. One of those questions was, if you've got multiple entries, how do you know which team to pair with your entry? I'm going to call them lines. All right. What you traditionally may call an entry, I call it a line because obviously they're in a line. And from my bingo, I was never a bingo player, but from my grandmother's bingo days, they used to call them lines up on the top. If you were in the 1 line, the 2 line, the 3 line, so on and so forth. So if you look at the line that you have, let's kind of touch on it this way. Of course, the weaker teams that you have left, the equity, I'm going to start with this, the equity that you can build in the pool. And that's what we're really trying to do. We're trying to build equity so that in the future, we have enough equity where we can maybe take some of that equity off the table by way of hedging. For those of you in Circa or any of the bigger pools where Survivor Sweat sells in the secondary market, you could sell shares of your pool, anything like that. Even if you have a friend who may want to buy into your pool that you're in, maybe you have $100 entry in your pool that's now worth, let's say, $1,500 because you've survived to a point where you've been able to 15x your money, and someone wants to pay you for a piece and get a share of that pool. Like anything like that, where we're really limiting our variance. And variance is huge in pools like this because, especially if you are in a pool that is very large, you're going to have a ton of variance. The odds of you winning that pool are slim. I think I talked about it in week 1. If we took the exact optimal path, at least starting on week 1, you've got about a 0.2, 0.3% chance of winning all of your weeks if you're playing in an 18-week traditional league with no knockouts, no rebuys, anything like that. You've got about a 0.2, 0.3% chance of making it all the way through week 18. So it's very, very unlikely. And if you only had one entry a year for the next 20, 30 years, there's a good chance you'll never actually see a full 18 weeks of being successful and not getting knocked out of your pool. So because of that, we'd love to just take some equity off the table if we can, if we get deep enough in the pool. And then your risk tolerance is going to be what determines when you want to take some equity and how you want to play it. And we'll get into all that as the season gets deeper, more teams start getting people eliminated and entries are eliminated. We'll get more into hedging and strategies there. But I want to touch on one thing. How do you know where to play, which team to put with other teams? Now, just like everything else in Survivor, there's no real clear-cut rule. It's going to depend on you and the type of pool you're playing in. All right. So if you're playing in a massively large pool, what do I always say about large pools? Really, and when I say massively, I'm talking 1,000 entries and up. All right. When you're playing in these large pools, the probability of you winning is obviously very slim, which means we need to take more chances. We need to take a little bit more risk and hope that some of the higher owned teams get knocked out. That's going to build equity. Well, how else can we build equity? We can build equity in these pools by creating a line or an entry with weaker teams, right? So if you took the line of, let's say, you had Jacksonville and last week you had Arizona, that's going to be a much better line, right, than if I took Philadelphia and Baltimore as my 2 picks, right? If I was going to buy your entry in the pool, I want the one with the 2 weaker teams as winners as opposed to the 2 stronger teams. So you have to make that call. I really can't make that call for you about how you're going to pair the entry that you're going to make this week and in future weeks with some of your entries. So like, for instance, I'm in a pool where I've got 30 entries. It's a pool that's got, I think we started with about 12 or 1,300 total entries in that pool. So again, I'm a huge underdog, as we all are, to win this. So I have all 30 of my entries still alive. I've got some entries last week. What I did last week in that pool was I think I took 5 Arizona picks, 25 Baltimore. And what I tried to do with the Arizona picks was mix it up. So I took an Arizona pick with Philly. I had a Washington winner. I took and I mixed it up, and I kind of put Arizona with each one of the winners, and maybe I doubled up on a team as well. But now, of course, my Arizona, and let's say I'm trying to think of the teams that won. I think I had a Jacksonville. So let's say my Arizona Jacksonville line is, of course, far better than my Baltimore and Philadelphia line. As we stated, right? I've got more equity. So now this week when I'm looking at it, I may, because there's so many people left in the pool, I may take a riskier pick or a weaker team with my weak line and try to build even more equity because I'm still way far out of the money. Now, if the pool that you're in is getting down to 50 people, 40 people, and it's getting to the point where you've now built a ton of equity, and you've got a line that has been very much the weaker teams, you've, of course, built even more equity than that line would state. That may be a point where you say, you know what, I'm going to start going chalky. I'm going to start taking the pick that I'm going to take the Baltimore or the Buffalo or the Philadelphia or whoever it is in there because I've already built enough equity. I want to save this line. It's a really good entry. It's a really good line. And of course, there's no guarantee that you're going to save it, but you're going to feel better. I'm going to take that 10-point favorite with that line and not the 4-point favorite who's a weaker team because I want to create I want that line to really last because I've spent the first 6 or 7 weeks, let's say, building an entry that was lucky enough to stay alive, but is much stronger, has much stronger teams left than maybe the average line in that pool. So hopefully that makes sense to you. As the weeks go on, it's going to really become more important to look at that. But certainly now that we're in week 3, if you're in a large pool and you've gotten away with 2 of the weaker teams, I'm really putting some weak teams with that. And depending on how many entries I have, because I really would love to be able to get an entry with some of the weaker teams to week 5, week 6 before I switch I flip the switch and I start playing some of the more chalky and better teams in the league. So that's one thing I wanted to touch on with you guys. I mentioned last week, rebuys, double knockouts. If you're in those type of pools, you should be totally focusing on the favorites this week that you have absolutely no chance of taking again. Now, last week, we didn't have like that really wacky favorite that in my opinion, that you could take. So like sometimes you'll get a game where it's just 2 really weak teams and you want to take that weak team that you'll never want to play again. I thought Arizona was probably a good pick for that last week, even though they were a good pick in regular pools. But there were some other ways you could have gone. I know some people went with Pittsburgh, and that obviously did not wind up being successful. But your goal in those type of pools is really to take the weakest possible team you can for as long as you possibly can, because those are like free weeks. And then when you get knocked out, then you flip to or not get knocked out, but if your team loses and you got 1 rebuy or you've got 1 knockout that you're allowed to have before you are on the precipice of elimination, so that second loss knocks you out, you can then wait until you get to the point where your next loss is out of the pool before you start playing it kind of the way we're playing the traditional survivor pool. So just take a note of that. I'll try to talk about those when we go over the teams and which teams I like. All right. Last thing, line changes. Be careful. Last week, Dallas, we talked about Dallas a lot in the video, but that Dallas line came down. I do these videos Wednesday morning. By the time Sunday rolls around, we could see 2-3 point difference in the line. It could be an injury, just could be steam hitting the market where the price is going to change dramatically, and that may change who you take. So watch Survivor Grid. If you go to the Sharp app, of course, you could see the updated lines. I like to look at Pinnacle, which is the sharpest book out there. I'll look at the Pinnacle lines. You could do that with the Sharp app and try and see as the week goes on, are the lines moving? And if so, that may change my opinion. A lot of times you guys ask me questions, and I love your questions down in the comments. You'll ask me to pick between 2 teams, and they're very close in all aspects. Arizona, Dallas last week started out very close on the point spread. As the week went on, and then by the time Sunday came around, Arizona was the clear favorite. Dallas had come down in price, and Arizona looked like a much better play. All right. So, of course, these things don't always work out exactly the way the lines go. I understand that. But we want to try to give ourselves the best opportunity, that slightest bit of edge. You know, if you're in a pool, you're one of 100 people in a pool, you've got a 1% chance. But the fact that you're watching this video, that may increase your chances to 2%, which is massive. And you'll see as we get deeper in these pools, your advantage is going to increase dramatically because we're going to really dive into game theory. And that's where let's pop open the let's go to the spreadsheet for this week. You many of you guys know are familiar with the spreadsheet. For those who are not, this is just a spreadsheet that I put together. It's not the end all be all, but it's a sheet that I use as guidance in my picks. So I've updated this with the current lines, and you can see this week we've got Buffalo as the big favorite here against Miami. That Miami team looks to be in a bit of turmoil, but you got about an 88% chance. Again, guys, I take the midpoint here. I look at the pinnacle lines. I take the midpoint between the Miami money line and the Buffalo money line to come up with the win probability. It's not exactly perfect, but we're going to be talking about very slightly off, and for our purposes, it is perfect. All right, so you've got about an 88% chance here with Buffalo to win. Obvious choice in small pools. I'm going to show you, we're going to go to Survivor Grid, though, and we always want to double check just because they're the biggest favorite, and I like you guys to get on the biggest favorite in very small pools. Small pools, 50 to 75 or less entries. It's not just small pools, by the way, guys. It's as we get deeper into the season, so less future weeks. We don't care as much about future value, right? We still got a lot of weeks to go. So in larger pools, we are going to be looking at future value. But in pools like that are, let's say, 50 people left, I really want to try and take the best possible teams I can early because who knows how long that pool is going to go. All right, so my first look here, Buffalo looks like a pretty strong play, 88%. You've got Green Bay at 79% probability to win that game. So these are obviously the two favorites for this week, the two highest point spreads and money lines. So the spreadsheet at 0% future value weight is going to weigh those two teams as the best two teams. If we move out to 50%, you can see that change. And then Seattle, because Seattle, let me tell you about future value here. The larger the number, the higher the number, the less future value they have, because this is based on what the future lines are going to be. So Buffalo is going to be a cumulative minus 103 in the point spread. And that's obviously, we don't know that for sure, but as of right now, that's what the future looks like. So the lower this number, the greater the negative, the more future value a team has. So you can see the better teams like Baltimore and Buffalo here have the most future value, Philadelphia, all right? And a team like Seattle, which is in the positive, doesn't have all that much future value. So when we move this to 50%, suddenly Seattle becomes one of the top picks. Move this to 100%, here it becomes really interesting. You can see now we're weighting future value a lot more, which is why the spreadsheet is suggesting that the second choice now be Indianapolis. Why is that? Well, they've got very little future value, still have a 65% chance to win their game. And what this is saying is, hey, you may not ever need Indianapolis again, at least from just looking at this metric. All right. But then we need to really dial it down. We need to look at the actual games, because what if, one of these teams does have that 1 week, maybe Seattle's got 1 week where they will be a 5, 6, 7 point favorite again, but all their other weeks they're going to be underdogs, right? So that's why we want to look at Survivor Grid. Let's take a look at what the future looks like for these teams. And I'll bring up here the Survivor Grid and we'll take a look at that. All right, so Survivor Grid, let's look at Buffalo first. Now, we said Buffalo, the number one team this week as far as win percentage, playing Miami. But then look, right away, I like to look, whether it's in a small pool or really large pool, I want to look at the next 2, 3, even maybe sometimes 4 weeks out, just because I don't want to back myself into a corner, which can happen if you don't pay attention to the next few weeks. Of course, you also want to pay attention if you got double picks. I'm in that pool with the 30 picks. Next week is a double pick week for me, so I really want to focus on that. And make sure that I do give myself some opportunities. Those of you in Circa, of course, you want to make sure that you have at least a team to pick, and preferably a decent team to pick when it comes to the Thanksgiving and Christmas Day games. All right, so we're going to look here. Buffalo, while being a 12-point favorite this week, they're projected to be an even larger favorite at home against New Orleans next week. So this shows us maybe we don't have to take Buffalo this week. We've got some pretty good options here below them. Do we want to take Green Bay? Do we want to take a Seattle? Well, we look at Green Bay. Obviously, Green Bay looks like one of the better teams in the league. They're going to be favored in a lot of their games. They get Carolina at home right now, 7.5 point spread. That's probably going to be even larger than that. When we look out, that looks like a double-digit spread coming. So we've got them in that week that we can look at. At home for Minnesota, may not be the greatest, but they've got a really tough schedule. But definitely this Carolina game at home is a possibility. So we do know, and it's a ways out, but we know in week 9, we've got a possibility. What are the other teams here in week 9? You've got the Rams hosting New Orleans. That could be a good pick. May not be using the Rams up until then. But I just want you to note that we do have some possibilities here with Green Bay, and that's why Green Bay may not get as much ownership here as Seattle, or pick percentage, however you want to talk about it. Seattle, let's look at them. New Orleans this week, over a touchdown favorite, but at Arizona, home for Tampa, at Jacksonville, home for Houston, bye at Washington, home for Arizona, at the Rams, at Tennessee. All right, maybe the at Tennessee game in week 12, you could think about taking them. But let's look at that week. Baltimore, if you have them available, probably won't have them available to you by week 12. Kansas City, there is a possibility that you'll have a Kansas City. We'll see about Detroit. But we're seeing options, San Francisco and Carolina. Philly at Dallas, I don't know if we're going to necessarily want that. Cincinnati, they're banged up with New England, probably aren't going to want that. So it's possible, right? I don't want to go too crazy here looking out into the future. But when we look at Seattle the rest of the way, really not a lot of opportunity to take them. So that's why they are going to be a relatively popular pick in most formats. And I do think in both the small pools and all the way up to very large pools, I think Seattle becomes a real interesting, strong play because of the fact if we wait just 1 week, if we could get by this week, we wait 1 week, we can take Buffalo next week. And obviously, if you hold on to Buffalo even longer, you are going to have some opportunities to take them. Let's look. This gets really hairy here in week 5. Let's look at week 4's options, first of all. If we took Buffalo in week 3, Detroit, home for Cleveland, looks like a really good play, so that's not a big deal. We could always go Buffalo, then Detroit. If we do that, what does it look like in week 5? Well, Buffalo, we would have taken. Presumably, you've taken Baltimore, and if you didn't take Baltimore, are you holding them for this week? Probably not. You're probably, certainly in circuit, you're holding them probably for Thanksgiving. And for those of you in other types of pools, you may not be holding them for this week. So a lot of you took Baltimore already, so this wouldn't even be an option, and maybe you don't want to take them yet. Minnesota at Cleveland. Minnesota obviously now banged up at quarterback. The quarterback wasn't looking all that great to begin with at Cleveland. I don't know if this is necessarily one here that we're going to be interested in. Comes back to Arizona again, home for Tennessee. Now, Arizona has not looked good against 2 weak opponents. They did win. Tennessee, another weak opponent. That's a possibility as well. Philly, home for Denver. Denver, not terrible. So this whole way, Kansas City at Jacksonville, these are not great games. So really, I'm going to leave it up to you guys as to where you want to go. Do you feel confident with Buffalo at home against New England? Baltimore home, if you still have Baltimore left. Houston, this week 5 is really going to be the determinant in what you do here in weeks 3 and 4. So I haven't even made my mind up yet as far as what I want to do with my picks. And I'm going to see, I always tell you guys, let's take a wait and see on what the lines do. If we get some drastic line movements, we get an injury that we weren't expecting, whatever, anything like that, we may be in a situation where where it'll sort of present itself. The best play will present itself to us. So we'll see if that happens. But as of right now, I think it's very, very difficult to choose which team we're going to take. It's going to come down to your week 5. Now, in most of my pools, I use Baltimore, so that's not going to be a week 5 option for me. I just think Seattle right now looks like the best play. I, of course, have multiple picks, so I'm going to mix it up. I'm definitely not going to all in here with Seattle. I don't like that play like I did with Baltimore last week. So I'm going to have a mix of Seattle. I'm definitely going to have some Buffalo in there. I'm going to have some Green Bay in there as well. Now the question is, how do I allocate it? And I'm going to figure that out as the week goes on. So I like that. And I think in larger pools, I think that Indianapolis play also makes sense. Let's quickly just go back to the Survivor grid here and take a look at what Indianapolis looks like for the rest of the season, because that may change our minds as far as what we're looking at. So bring up the Survivor grid. Where's Indy? Okay, so Indianapolis here at the Rams, no good. Home for Vegas. Yeah, Arizona at home. None of these are huge. Tennessee, probably a decent play here, but you've got some other really strong ones in week 8. Cincinnati and the Jets, that obviously could change here with the quarterback injury. Buffalo and Philly are teams that we may have taken by this point in week 8. Baltimore, another team we may have taken. Tampa at New Orleans. Okay. New England, home for Cleveland. Perhaps Denver, home for Dallas. I think the moral of the story here is it's going to start getting difficult real quickly. So I think you guys are going to differ from where I'm going on some of these weeks, and that's kind of what makes these pools a lot of fun. So I really want you guys to focus on the next 3 weeks. Come up with your plan as to how you're going to attack it. Of course, always leave me a comment down below if you need me to help walk you through any of these things. It's a difficult. I don't think this week is difficult. We'll see. I mean, we haven't had any chaos. I think this week, as far as the top teams, I feel pretty good about them, but you never know. We certainly had the opportunity to knock a few out last week, but in these next couple of weeks, and certainly week 5, it's going to get really tricky. So I appreciate you guys being here. Hopefully you're learning a little something, as well as being able to advance in your survivor pools, make some money. Guys, do me a favor again. Like I said, if you could share this video with a friend, that helps even more than just subscribing or sending or liking the video. And by the way, the amount of likes that we've gotten on the video, it's insane. 100% of the likes, they give you that. They don't tell you anymore on YouTube whether what percentage and how many likes there were to dislikes. We had 0 dislikes and something like 400 likes or 300 some odd, like whatever the number was, some crazy number, which is very humbling, and I appreciate it. So I thank you guys again, and hopefully I will see you guys back next week. It's starting to get hairy and it's starting to get tricky. So hopefully I can help guide you guys all the way to the finish line here on Scratchin' Surviving.